another day. So to just wrap up and bring it back to minimum wage, we found no common points. There we go. All right. Okay, so I guess maybe we'll come back to this sometime. I know there were some things I wanted to look up. I hope you send me those links. Was there anything that I brought up that you'd be interested in reading or learning more about?
Well, I did want to bring up some of the things that I read. That the national minimum wage, I think they're pushing for is 2024. So it hasn't really come into effect. So if it is affecting us positive or negative, I don't think we're going to see it till probably like 2024, 2026.
Well,
things I think are important.
Businesses will react. I mean, just because they're the slow arm of the government is going to do it in 2024 doesn't mean that all the businesses that are going to be affected by it from this day forward aren't making plans and adjusting their businesses starting right now to get there. More animation, start cutting training, start cutting Christmas parties. Let's not hire as much. Let's retain more workers and keep them in. So by 2024,
or the minimum wage is so low it doesn't have any of those effects. And
that's possible if inflation at this point gets so freaking bad because they're also destroying the dollar that it won't matter. Inflationary price will be so high, minimum wage will never catch up to it. Or we get deflation afterwards and then it'll drop below and it'll be higher than the competitive normal market wage. It'll go up and down based on that.
All right, so what do you think about the fact that like comparative productivity, starting in like the 40s and the 50s when we first started doing minimum wages, if productivity had matched minimum wage, they projected to be around $20 now.
How do they divide the productivity? I mean, if this is leading into the war, so I'm sure our manufacturing base was just churning out tanks and crap. So that doesn't really count if you're just measuring the numbers. You have to add in that we were at war. So if they had minimum wages, and on top of which there is lots of proof that what happened through the minimum wage laws and tariffs and price controls during the Great the Great Depression leading up to the World War, also were already hurting the economy, and the war basically saved it.
That's your interpretation. Absolutely not. The minimum wage was not what? Before the Depression?
And then all of 3, 4, 5 million troops left, and suddenly we got a big push into the workforce from women. So unemployment is super low. Wages are starting to go high because they need them. They're also borrowing money out the wazoo to keep paying people. And one of the reasons they're forcing in those laws, I'm just guessing by the time period that I'm just giving you other effects that could have affected numbers. Like, look, they put in this minimum wage here, no unemployment. And then ignoring the fact that there was a world war, a depression, and millions of people, or hundreds of thousands killed. Suddenly they all come back, and then we have a big old industrial boom because we got a bunch of trained soldiers come back. There's so much going on in there that you have to add that into any calculation. Then you have to add that into any calculation that's measuring the effect of the minimum wage through here. 50s, 60s, 40s
you would put in all the effects that have happened in history for the last 60 years. I don't know why you're focusing on 1940 to 1943 as a weird
you said
jump, and I'm not done. As a weird jump in pay when I'm talking between 1940 and 2020. That's over like 80 years. So yeah, there'll be ups and downs, but I don't care. I don't understand why you're focusing on 1943, 44, 45.
Okay, yeah, I'm about to tell you. I don't think you said that second half. You said and if you did, I didn't hear it. You said 1940, and I guess what you meant was between 1940 50, but you said 1940, 1950. And if you said
To
till
now.
2020 or till now, I missed that. So I was talking about the 10-year period between 1940 and 1950.
All right. Well, I mean,
That's
it's
all.
definitely something to focus on about why those 10 years were good. But I'm
Right.
saying is productivity from back in the 40s till now, if the minimum wage had stuck up with productivity, it should be around 20 bucks an hour.
Right, that was the first part. I think I gave 2 or 3 things that I said I wanted to be split between. And also I said the amazing industrial production that we kicked into because of the war, again, is because of the war, not because they raised the minimum wage. And then production
We're very
and then
productive
production,
now.
right, and then
So
production
who
after.
cares? That should help your argument then. If what I'm comparing to is a time we were super productive in the 1940s, getting out of World War II to now, then that should help your argument, not hurt it. I don't know why you keep bringing this up. If it was a bad economy, and we were starting in the 20s or the 30s, like in the middle of the Depression, I get what you mean. But all right, cool. So they had a good economy then. They had a lot of productivity in the 40s when we're starting this. Cool. Now in 2020, productivity is a lot better. Why isn't the wage up then?
Okay, when I start over this time, don't interrupt me after I talk about the 40s and 50s in industrial production. And I promise to continue talking all the way through 2020, like you're saying. Because of that industrial explosion in the 40s and 50s, it was the beginning of an industrial era that has continued all the way through, but in different businesses. That would have to be teased out of the production. You're saying all of that production, the employees aren't getting enough. But what if most of that production has to do with the capital material, the machines and factories that are being provided for by the employer, and not that just they're getting better? Both is happening at the same time. But until you start figuring out what percentage of production increase is from the machines, what part of the production increase is from higher level management strategies, employment strategies, physical brain techniques that make workers faster or not, as opposed to from that time period, the American worker has gotten so much more skilled. So you would have to tease that out. And I bet that the proportion that someone else would look at and say this part should go to the employee is definitely lower than what people think. But that's for other reasons as well, as opposed to if I increase the minimum wage, therefore that production gap would disappear and the employees would be getting the same percentage of the production increase that they should be during any of those time periods, I would imagine.
But wouldn't that be reflected then in less profits? If productivity was matched with just the cost of the factory and all these things, and it wasn't just profit, wouldn't profit stay the same or get less if what you're saying is true?
All other factors solid, I guess is what you're saying? I'm not quite. Ask the question again.
You're saying that just because productivity is up, it doesn't mean that should have gone to the workers, because maybe it was a cost in all the equipment and things like that. Isn't that what you said? Am I misinterpreting that?
Right. I said you would have to figure out, you would have to be able to separate that out and then figure out how much, not just the cost of the machine, but if I install a machine that lets you do the same job you've been doing faster so that we get more production, who is adding that extra production? Is it you because you're a worker, or are you still just stamping something? But I figured out a better tool. I've paid for a better tool. I've given you another method. I've put in a trainer that makes you more productive at the same skill. How do you tease that out when you're trying to decide how much more in wages the employees should have gotten based on all this great increase in general production? To just look at the general production and say the employee's missing out on a lot is not using any of the other metrics you would use to say this is how we increased productivity.
I think what you're describing, that kind of detailed analysis, means we'd have to look at every single industry, try to get down to each factory, each thing, and work it out. I don't think you have to do that. I think you can look at the numbers I'm talking about that show productivity raising and that profits are raising. And it seems all across the board, that is exactly what's happening. Profits from corporations are at a much higher trajectory than workers, and productivity seems to be matching that higher profit. So I would say that is how you can do it without getting involved in every single factory and trying to work out all those things. I'm not saying you shouldn't work out all the things you've just discussed, but for this discussion, I'm pretty confident in saying the extreme rise in profit and the extreme rise in production and not the rise in pay equals what I'm saying.
So you think if you raise minimum wage laws, you will lower their profits and make less rich corporations? Do you think that somehow the minimum wage corrects that disparity in who's getting the benefit of the production over the last like 100 years or 70 years?
It can.
It can? Is that what you said? Okay. And you think how do you think that would happen? How do you think the minimum wage could make an employer earn less other than, I guess, putting them out of business?
They make less profit, but stay open.
Or they lower their training programs, they cancel certain products, and if you're a monopoly like McDonald's, you can just add 2 cents onto all your burgers, make the customer pay for the increase in the wage, you make more money, and in fact, your business grows because you're the only business with the kind of economy of scale that can absorb a minimum wage increase. So you get less competition, you get the best of all low wage workers, and you get to start retaining people more than ever because they don't want to go because it's not an entry-level job anymore.
Yeah, all those are cans, and I think quite a stretch. Or
I'm sorry.
Those
are all
McDonald's
what?
makes less, and we just raise up the minimum wage like many other countries do.
They're all what? Cans?
Yes, those are not definites. That's an interesting idea you have, and could possibly happen. Maybe, I don't know. Or
but that's what
McDonald's
the studies
just makes a little less, and people make a little more, and they spend money, and we're all happy.
You really think McDonald's is just going to accept making a little less? They're not going to do all the things I just said to compensate for having a higher labor cost? You don't think they're going to adjust? They're just going to take less money? Because it's pretty proven that that's exactly what they do. And in fact, since 1993, the Carden-Kruger papers that they've been putting out on the monopsony wage model that is used for most of the information that says things like that, in its own explanation, it says the reason that a monopoly restaurant in particular, because they were studying like McDonald's, Burger King, the reason within the papers that they would say is because a McDonald's is big enough to do everything I just said. I'm not making it up. It's from a paper that is based, that is used to explain the monopsony model in what industries it works. That particular model has been expanded to say what you're saying, that it does have a positive effect. And most economists will say, even Austrian school economists will say, well, of course, in a monopoly, you have all the power. You can make a lot of things work. But that doesn't mean that the minimum wage doesn't affect McDonald's the same way it does every other. McDonald's just can slide sliders so they keep their profits, and they make more profits because they put their competitors out, and they're getting the best of the low-wage workers. It's not made up stuff. That's the actual papers written for your side of the argument.
It's interesting. You always want to take my side of the argument when I don't agree with you. Don't worry about my side. If you want to post something, post something. McDonald's has increased in cost their entire existence. Since the day they were started, they've had increased in cost, and prices have gone up.
That happens to businesses.
And that needs to raise. It's very simple. And for you to say that, like, hey, inflation works here, and things go up here, and it's passed to the customer, and that's bad, but not labor. Can't pass the price of labor to the customer, but you can price the cost of the hamburger bun.
That's what I just said.
Raises, if the meat raises, all these
That's what I just said. That's what I just said. That is how you pass the cost on to the customer, is with those things.
How you can, first of all, can. Secondly, inflation has gone up 2% to 3% every decade. No matter what happens, it's always gone up. It doesn't go down. It goes up. There might be minor times it's gone down for a little bit, like when the 2009 crash happened, or something huge comes out that really does speed things up. And so inflation goes up, so wages should match, because a lot of other things are still going up. McDonald's, you can't use McDonald's as, you can't raise labor as a fear when we have no controls over what the grain costs and what the meat costs. Those all go up. It is what it is.
No,
yes, you raise the price of labor, and it does in a small fraction go to the customer. So be it.
They use futures markets to lock in the corn costs and food costs for years ahead of time. So no, it's not like each year they're coming in and going, dang it, we ain't got enough beef. A group that size has got its own beef produce plants. It knows 4 or 5 years ahead of time. It's using futures to control the price so it stays low. It's the kind of power they use to stay on top. So that is not true.
You're talking McDonald's. You're talking one corporation. How about the small business then? Am I right on small business, or do you have some?
No, they're out of business. No, in this scenario, they're out of business. Remember, you said that too. They're out of business.
And have done the same thing for the last 60 years, raise prices. What about them?
Everybody has to raise prices in inflation.
Exactly, and that's why you have to raise minimum wage so people can afford prices.
No, that's why you got.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
If you want to index minimum wage to inflation, sure. But if there shouldn't be a minimum wage in the first place, it doesn't take away the fact that you're forcing people to work for a lower wage. So I get you. But also, this inflation only goes up. That's not true.
For the most part.
Inflation
for decade to decade.
Inflation recently, in like the last 70, 80, maybe 100 years, it's steadily gone up since the creation of the Federal Reserve and the constant increase of the money supply. But that is not the natural effect of inflation. That's why we have inflation and deflation and stagflation. There are many different, and to act like it's just an inflation land means you don't understand inflation, because as this inflation keeps going, we're going to turn it around the other side and we will have deflation, where prices start going down. That's a pretty natural thing to happen. And if you just don't believe in anything other than inflation, then I understand why a lot of this makes sense to you.
I absolutely not did not say that. I told you in 2009 it went down. There's individual items that went down.
All right.
I told you it rarely goes down. And from decade to decade, it goes up. There are small items that have gone down, like I think the price of a TV's gone down pretty substantially in our lifetime. Price of computer, mostly electronics. Yeah, sometimes it goes down, but rarely. But from decade to decade and from year to year, it's a steady up, and minimum wage is not. Minimum wage needs to match that.
Gotcha.